medical history enthusiasts, and welcome to our today's episode. Like a thief in the night, COVID-19 came unexpectedly and the Philippines was shaken. No country has anticipated COVID-19. But the underlying question is this the first time the Philippines, the world, has experienced in this pandemic? So in this episode, we will look back at the Philippines and perhaps the world experience of the pandemics in the past. Come and join us as we think like a historian. Before anything else, let us first define what is pandemic. According to the Dictionary of Epidemiology, pandemic is defined as an epidemic occurring worldwide or over a very wide area, crossing international boundaries and usually affecting a large number of people, just like the COVID-19. But then, is COVID-19 our first experience of pandemic? The answer is no. In the past, we have already experienced pandemics. To name a few in this presentation, we enumerated 4 past pandemics dated way back 1817. We already have the cholera pandemic, Spanish flu in 1918, severe acute respiratory syndrome or SARS in 2003, and the swine flu pandemic in 2009. Clearly, global pandemic is not new to people, but we want to dig deeper in this issue by using a historical perspective. So our group looked for a primary source about the pandemic about the past. We chose the Spanish flu pandemic because it's quite similar to COVID-19. So our primary source is a journal article entitled An Epidemic of Influenza at Manila. With this primary source, we will be incorporating the 6 steps of historical thinking strategy. Contextualizing. The document was written by Dr. Albert Francis Cotant, MD-MA, a major eyewitness of the influenza epidemic, situating the source in time and place. The events in this article is situated at Manila, Philippines, in the month of June in the year 1918, during the American occupation in the Philippines, particularly during the coming and end of World War I. We have also contextualized that the document source was in the period where there is insufficiency in the healthcare system and response rate toward the health crisis were not fast enough due to lack of resources. Second step, close reading. Document's content started off as an author narrated by how the epidemic of influenza appeared in the Philippines island. In June 1918, it was written in English language and his name hint his American citizenry, which we have verified through after have research about him. Furthermore, his account has often mentioned the US Army, Europeans and Americans, battlefront, Trans-Pacific vessel, which gave us more hint that the timeline was situated during the American occupation in the Philippines, and that there was some sort of war happening or has happened. Also, the quoted word statement below are extracted from the document source, in which hint about the strict impact of influenza and the insufficiency in the healthcare system. Interestingly, we have also noted Dr. Cotan's diagnosis of about the prevalent illness. Throat or upper respiratory tract symptoms, sudden high fever and headache, with aching and stiffness all over the body. There was also word clues that the treatment was not effective enough because of the mortality rate remained high.
Next is the third step, which is the using the background knowledge. So our background knowledge about the 1918 influenza tells us that the said phenomenon was not just an epidemic in the Philippine setting but had become a global pandemic. Moreover, we have acknowledged that in the 19th century, the medium of communication in the Philippines were not that efficient, and we have understood how the author as a doctor struggled to finalize his medical decisions and make coordination with other medical personnel. Thus, we have concluded that this insufficiency in the past contributed to the severity of the epidemic. Furthermore, the timeline of the writer's account was dated in the month of November 1918. So basically, his account covered what happened around June up to the month it was written. This means that it only covers the first wave of the said global pandemic in the Philippine setting. Now, for the fourth step, which is reading the silences, we have identified the following questions or what has been left out or is missing by source. So the origin of the influenza was not mentioned. From what country? How did the epidemic affect the global economy at that time? How about the second wave, the third wave? How does the Philippine government respond amidst the spread of the flu? What are the emergency programs and the ordinances that have been implemented by the government? And for the fifth step, which is the corroborating, we also look for the other resources relevant to the Spanish flu. And we have an account from Francis A. Geologo entitled The Philippines in the World of the Influenza Pandemic of 1918 to 1919, published 2009. But this account is a secondary source. The underlined word is the similarity from Geologo 2009 and Cotant 1980. Both agreed that the dying patients developed pneumonia. Moreover, we also have other primary sources which are news articles, but the setting is not in the Philippines but in Utah, United States. From the first news article, entitled "The Epidemic of Influenza Threatens Whole World," dated July 13, 1918, our comparisons show that the illness that plagued the US and the Philippines is not a mere coincidental, as the causative agent, which is the Pfeiffer's bacillus, were deemed the same. From the second news article, Blue Reports on Influenza, dated September 13, 1918, that similarity pointed out that there is indeed a global pandemic that time, and the diagnosed manifestation of the prevalent illness were the same despite of the different setting. Now we are down to the last step, which is the trustworthiness of sourcing. So the primary source in the form of a written journal article created by Dr. Albert Francis Cotant. So we have deemed this source as credible because the author himself is an eyewitness and a medical expert, plus the document was fresh and timely written in the month of November 1918 to account the beginnings and his medical findings of the influenza pandemic. Now at this point, we will compare the two pandemics, the Spanish flu versus the COVID-19, both global but in different times. So the two pandemic are different in context, severity, and duration. The Spanish flu happened during the era where quality of life and the overall life expectancy were much lower, no internet, and the vaccine manufacturing is very limited. While the COVID-19 happened in the era with much better quality of life, advanced technology, more resources, and wider knowledge. The Spanish flu was brief but very severe with 39 million deaths, while COVID-19 is longer and ongoing until now and with lesser death toll of 6.24 million, but the two pandemic have similarities. Both are novel, highly contagious virus that induces respiratory distress with the same mode of transmission. So what's the point of this discussion? What do we get from looking at our past experiences? So in order to mitigate the effect of a pandemic, we should learn from our past experiences and be prepared in three levels: community preparedness, healthcare preparedness, and global preparedness. What contributed to the severity of the Spanish flu pandemic in the past was the lack of foresight and preparedness, and unfortunately, we are repeating the same insufficiency in the present setting. As an overall conclusion of this presentation, let us remember a quotation from Jose P. Rizal: "I enter the future with a memory of the past." And we hope that the misfortunes and insufficiency during the Spanish flu in the past and the COVID-19 in the present would be simply taken for granted. Health preparation must start with you, with us,